Okay, so we're going to look at verse 7. The reason we're going to look at verse 7 is because it feels particularly relevant for what's going on in our country, in our state, in our world, and can be really useful for our inner work as well as our outer work. So when we do these verses, you know, it probably goes without saying not to keep it just as, oh, that's a nice thought, to maybe do something with it, you know, to maybe integrate it and make it personal. That probably goes without saying, but sometimes we need it to be said. So all of these are to be practiced, right? But how becomes the question. So this particular genre of teachings, lojong in Tibetan thought transformation, this particular genre is radical reframing. And the most common misunderstanding of it is like a form of gaslighting yourself, right? Okay, so we would call it spiritual bypassing in Buddhism. But, you know, gaslighting yourself, basically, you could read these verses and think, what a wonderful aspiration. Because I understand it, that must mean I do it, right? Or because I understand how I'm supposed to think, I'm going to jump over how I'm feeling and go straight to the goal, bypassing all of the actual integrative steps it takes to actually be in a verse like this. So understanding it intellectually won't take very long at all. Right? You will understand it intellectually with a few sentences of me explaining and go, oh yeah, that makes sense given the words on the page and what you just said. Yep, not my first rodeo with going to class, thank you. But then how do you actually practice it? That becomes the nitty-gritty. And how you actually practice it in a healthy, functional way that is at the pace you're actually at, not the pace you push yourself to assume you are, right? Not to think, because I have these ideals, that I live up to these ideals. The whole point of calling it an ideal is that you're not quite there yet. It's something to live up to. The problem with kind, polite, deep thinking people is that on a good day, you can, right? On a good day, you can do these things. And so then you hold yourself up to that standard and you expect a consistency from yourself, which is unfair. And then you get disappointed in your practice because you're not living up to it. Because some days you can, it's like this intermittent reinforcement, right? It's like Pavlov's dog, right? You're ringing the bell. And you're like, well, yesterday I was perfectly patient with that really difficult person, and today I want to bite their head off. What happened to me? What's wrong with me? Or you pretend that you don't want to bite their head off, which is even worse. You go, well, because I am a bodhicitta practitioner, I'm a Mahayanist, I am a Buddhist, I have a feeling, which some would call anger, but I shall just call it passion, right? Right? Or I will say, it's just something going on physiologically. It must be my gut biome. It might be a somatic experience. I need to do some butterfly tapping. I need to do some havening exercises. You know, there's a polyvagal breathing exercise that's going to help me, but I'm not angry. I'm just having a physiological response, right? You know that one? You know what I'm talking about, right? So what we don't want to do is talk over the top of what's actually arising. We don't want to talk over the top of it. We want to talk to it without believing it. But be curious about what's arising for you and what it has to say. So this verse is in short, meaning in short, given all of the verses that preceded, how's to practice, right? Given verses 1 through 6, here's what to do. In short, both directly and indirectly do I offer every happiness and benefit to all my mothers. I shall secretly take upon myself all their harmful actions and suffering. So if you read this with some sort of lens of psychology or some sort of lens of modern thinking about how to not be a doormat or how to be assertive, if you read this, it should sound problematic. Right? It should sound problematic. It's not problematic, but your initial read of it should be, well, that's a terrible idea. No, none of that, right? Directly, indirectly, what am I going to be manipulative? Secretly? What about the secrets are poison? You know, you go into all sorts of those kind of things. That you should find it problematic at first. It's incredibly radical reframing. So let's unpack it. So we'll jump to first the mothers, okay, because most of you know this, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, the Buddhist worldview is that time is beginningless, okay? Premise 1, time is beginningless. Premise 2, sentient beings, beings that have a consciousness, are incredibly vast, not just contained in this world system, incredibly vast, so vast that you could not put a number to them, but finite. There are no new ones. There are no new sentient beings being born. So the idea that some traditions have of old souls is not one that we ascribe to. We would ascribe to someone who has learned their lessons well, who has probably been human back to back to back lifetimes more recently, and so has a kind of a depth, but we're all the same age as it turns out, okay? So those two are the working premise for this verse. Time is beginningless, sentient beings are vast but finite. You don't have to believe this, but this is where we're speaking from, right? Okay, so given that, we've all been each other's mother. Given that, we've all been each other's mother. We've also been each other's enemy and each other's snack and each other's bestie and each other's pet and each other's enemy. And we've all been everything to each other countless times. We're choosing to zero in on the times we've been each other's mother because the mother archetype is the best example we have in samsara or cyclic existence of less conditional love. Maybe not unconditional love, but less conditional love. Theoretically, archetypally, and then probably 3/4 of the room says, but my mother is problematic, right? What about my mom, though, right? And indeed, that's not even the point of the verse. The point is to zoom in on what are these archetypal mother qualities that we're talking about, and if your father was the one that held them, swap. You can use your own relationships of this life if they're not too triggering, but you don't have to for this verse to work. For this verse to work, what you need to think about is the kindness that you've received in this life. In different chapters, from different relationships, in different moments where you have felt loved, seen, held, supported in a way which was, there was nothing really in it for the other person, other than perhaps a sense of well-being, or being a good person, sort of ego trip, sure. But like, it was pretty good for samsara. It might have been from a stranger. You know, your car blew out on the side of the road and you're in the back and you're getting the jack out and you're figuring out how it works and you've got the instructions out and some stranger pulls over and just does it for you, waves and goes. You know, kindnesses. They didn't have to, kindnesses. So you're kind of extracting real moments where you've experienced compassion and kindness from others. And then you can make an amalgamation of the mother archetype based on those experiences and it to feel real. Yeah. Do you know what I'm saying so far? Yeah. And if your own mother was easy, then use your mom, right? No worries. But because Westerners often have trickier relationships with their parents, I mean, I say Westerners, pretty much everyone has a tricky relationship with their parents, but in a less technologically advanced society with more simplicity, sometimes parents are more present, right? It's a broad stereotype, but it happens, right? In societies where there's less technology pressure and more kind of like everyday working through the land, working through everyday tasks, parents are often more present, and when they're more present, they're probably more friendly. So for societies that grew up in that way, having this mother archetype is sometimes less complicated. Yeah. So we're taking this mother archetype and then we're ascribing it to who? Every single sentient being, particularly the really rough ones. Okay? So we use the mother because there is a respect that gets elicited, there is a reverence that gets elicited, and there is a gratitude. Why don't we see all sentient beings as our child? Wouldn't that be easier to love children? Children are easy-ish, right? Children are also easier to look down on. So if we see all sentient beings as our children, there is a little kind of a trap of condescension that can creep in. You can be patronizing more easily. There, you poor child. You don't know what you're doing. There, your bad behavior. There's like an edge of condescension that can happen if you see all sentient beings as your children. Now, lots of people respect their children and are impressed by their children and lift them up and, so grain of salt with all of this. Make it personal, make it yours. But we use the mother archetype because of the lifting up, respectful attitude that can accompany it. Okay? So then you pick someone in your life who you find problematic, whether it's someone in your everyday life personally, or it's someone in your everyday kind of awareness that you haven't met but perhaps has a lot of power over your life or the lives of vulnerable people, perhaps a political figure or a business figure or someone. I'm not saying anything about anything, right? But yeah, I'm just saying, I'm not saying. So someone who you call problematic very easily when you think of them, okay? Whether, you know, your boss or whatever. And you think of that person as, they were once my mother. They were once my mother countless times. They once cleaned me and fed me and kept me safe. They once put little blankets over me and made sure I was in the right position to sleep. They sacrificed sleep and entertainment and work and, you know, their own nourishment and so many things for me for countless hours, days, months, years, and lifetimes. This one that I hate. Then you can sort of feel a, oh, yeah? Feel an oh, right? And you might feel repulsion, or you might feel gratitude, softening. You might feel any number of things, but be curious about that, like, oh, right? And even imagine yourself as a tiny child. There were, you know, the first couple years of our life, we would have died without care, right? It's not just that we wouldn't have been happy or entertained or educated. We would have died without care our first couple of years, right? So imagine this horrible figure, whoever they are, in a lifetime where they were in charge of your well-being, and they did all of those things that a parent does ideally. It can create a little bit of a dissonance or a little bit of a discomfort or kind of a, but now though, right? Then you start saying, but now though. Okay, put that to one side, acknowledge it. You don't have to talk over the top of it. Don't spiritual bypass it. Just kind of be, And then pivot to thinking about perhaps a story you've heard or a story you've experienced of someone like a parent getting dementia, right? Lots of us have this experience of someone dear to us getting Alzheimer's or dementia, or having a traumatic brain injury, or in some way changing, right? They were once a consistently kind, open-hearted person with their normal human foibles, but then there was a shift. Right? There was a shift maybe because of addiction, because of Alzheimer's, because of dementia, whatever. There was a shift, and now they are not themselves, right? They are not themselves. And what they're displaying might be actually quite awful, right? What they say, what they do, what they espouse, all of it is like really confusing and problematic. But you have the memory of them when they were well, right? You remember them when they're well. And while you're remembering them while they were well, it is easy to care for them. And as soon as you forget who they were when they were well, and just start identifying them with the symptoms of their sickness, it's very easy to lose compassion, to lose patience, to lose energy, right? And then you remember again all those years of kindness, or you remember again who they are when they were well. And you kind of recalibrate your compassion, and you can come back into a situation with, okay, this is not you, this is the illness. This is not you, this is the illness. And you can care for them even as they swear at you. You can care for them even as they spit on you. Can you imagine a situation like this, or remember a situation like this? So it's not different than the one now who is behaving badly, right? They're sick. They're sick with afflictions. Their behavior is not okay. We don't have to say that it's okay. We shouldn't say that it's okay. Their afflictions, their anger, their greed, that's also not okay. But it is a symptom of something that all of us have a version of. We are all sick in the same way, but the symptoms are expressing themselves differently based on the care that we've received. So if we can start with seeing all sentient beings as our mother from this kind of a lens, then immediately kind of the tendencies of retaliation, of punishment, or of withdrawing, disassociating, the kind of like escape mechanisms of our afflictions are tempered, which means then our heart can stay open, And our own well-being is not compromised by their bad behavior, right? Because we don't want our well-being to be compromised by their sickness. How is that going to make them better? It's not going to make them better if we meet them in crazy town, right? But it feels almost like when you meet bad behavior or you see bad behavior that you have to react with bad behavior, otherwise they won't know they're doing the wrong thing. Or you have to react with rage, otherwise people won't understand how important it is to address their behavior. There feels like a mandate to meet rage with rage. I'm going to meet bad behavior with righteous indignation, like it's a mandate, right? It feels this way in our society, and it is normal, it is natural, it is not necessary, it's not effective, right? The cycle of violence continues. It might have an immediate effect, but not a long-term benefit. So you might be able to subdue someone else's bad behavior by meeting force with force, but what is the repercussion? You know, and yeah, see the Middle East for details. Yeah, so, right? And so if we go in with this premise of everybody is right and everybody is wrong, right? And we go in with the premise of everyone is unwell, the symptoms vary. And the reason the symptoms vary is because of the care they've received, not because of their character intrinsically. Intrinsically, no. Because no one is inherently existent, right? No one just came out into the universe full of rage, greed, attachment, and wanting to harm others. No. From beginningless time until now, what we've had is ignorance. And then we bump into each other under the influence of ignorance and react, and then develop karmic patterns of reactivity. And some of them get reinforced and grow, and some of them get purified and end. But we all have the same ignorance. Yeah, we all have the same ignorance. And so if we're thinking about the inner work is my mother, my mother, my mother, my mother, my mother. Then our outer work is secretly, right? Secretly, I shall take upon myself all their harmful actions and suffering. This is an invitation to the Tonglen practice of taking and giving. It's also an invitation to not have performative activism. Yeah, to not perform your values. Have your values, express your values, hold your core values, deepen them, grow them, but do not perform them. Because it does not help, right? And then when you're sort of, highlighting or making a neon sign of what you think is right, there is a little bit of a judgmental quality even towards your own compatriots. You know, the people who have the same beliefs as you now sort of feel a little bit defensive of, do they live up to your standard of action? Do they live up to your standard of thought? And there becomes a dissonance even within communities that want to do good by people, right? So kind of proclaiming in a kind of performative way actually creates distance and dissonance and defensiveness, disconnect in our communities. So we do want to talk about what we believe. We do want to express what we believe. And you can have a bumper sticker. You can go to a rally. Sure, that's fine. But being very intentional about how we communicate that and really asking ourselves, am I communicating something that is intended to unify or something that is intended to divide? Yeah. And so how do we talk about politics? To our friends. Never mind how we talk about politics to people we don't agree with. How do we talk about it with people we do agree with? Is there an edge of competitiveness of who's got the most refined worldview, who has the most sophisticated way of thought? Yuck. But have you been in conversations like that where like someone's kind of the boss of the ideals in a yucky way, not in a sharing way? So by all means, elevate your friends and family in their thinking, but elevate it in a collaborative way that has deep, deep respect for them. Deep, deep acknowledgement that they too have Buddha nature, and they might actually have something to teach you also. So seeing them as mother has so many side effect benefits, because you want to care for your mother, but think about the chapters of life with your mother. There was the time in which she was your first teacher, She was your teacher of everything, how to walk, how to talk, what colors were, what numbers were. You relied on her for information, for wisdom to access the world. And then time grew on, and there was kind of a peer-ish relationship, but she kind of always did know better. And then she starts to get old, and then you have to kind of role reverse and go into a more caring position. And it's very easy to forget that she's the one that taught you all the things that you're now telling her, right? Here's how to brush your teeth, Mom. Here's how to wash your face, Mom, forgetting she was the one that taught you, right? And now you're condescending and patronizing this very one who was your first teacher. So what we're trying to hold in mind is being able to elevate our friends and family is trying to speak to our mothers with this acknowledgement that at one point they were teaching us. Yeah, so then you have this really respectful atmosphere when you talk about it, because the baseline assumption is wisdom has no copyright, and in fact, my learning came from others. So it's good that I have it, but I don't need to overly identify with it. You know, it's not mine, I don't have ownership with it. Just hooray, it wound up here. Yeah, I will share it if you want. Let's play with it together, let's expand it as a team. So seeing all sentient beings as your mothers can help diffuse your pride and help diffuse your disconnect. But if it's not doing that, think of other strategies to get to that place, because that's what's being invited here. Then secretly, we take upon ourselves all the harmful actions of suffering. This has layers and layers and layers of meaning. But the first layer is let people make mistakes without broadcasting their mistakes, unless those mistakes are actively harmful in an ongoing way to your friends, family, or community. Right? Like if someone says something a little bit, I don't know, unsophisticated, a little bit backward, a little bit problematic, but you can tell their intention is altruistic, is now the time to correct their language? Or is there a better time to correct their language or to invite an elevation of language? Some of you have heard this example I give all the time, but I always think of my grandfather who, you know, years ago when Obama was running for president, I asked him who he was going to vote for. I was really curious. He's an old rancher from Montana. And I didn't tell him who I was going to vote for, and I'm not going to tell you now. But I asked him, and he said, "Oh, I like that colored fella." But the thing is, he said, "I like." Right? If I had said, "Grandpa, we don't say colored anymore. We say people of color, or we say black, or we say African American, or we say this, or we say," if I had corrected him, I would have ruined the connection, right? It would have been really unskillful, right? Because what was he saying? He was saying, "I like him." And for his generation, that was the polite terminology, right? He's like World War II era. But then later, down the track, when it's an easy, comfy breakfast conversation, and it comes out kind of like blah, 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 that blah, 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 colored fella, like, "Oh, Grandpa, actually, we say this now. Anyway, do, no big deal. No guilt, no shame, no punishing." Because what are we actually trying to do with language is find more connections. So, secretly means pick your battles. Secretly means have the depth of practice that doesn't need to always be right and be correcting and be performing. Secretly can mean a lot of things, but one of them is just kind of like hear the deepest intention of people the best you can. And the time for correction and advice is when there is an opening to receive correction and advice, right? And who wants unsolicited advice? Right? It doesn't mean you can't correct people. It doesn't mean you can't educate people. It's about having enough patience and enough wisdom to know when is it actually going to be effective? Because if people feel shamed, even if they change the way you want them to change, there's going to be a backlash if you shame them. Right? There's going to be a grudge, there's going to be a tension. So the most effective work is when people's hearts are moved, not when they've been, kind of deflated, I guess. Yeah. So secretly, right? The other secretly is to think, how can I protect the vulnerable? How can I protect the vulnerable in my actions every day of body, speech, and mind without declaring to the world that you just did that? right? So you're at the grocery store and there's someone of a vulnerable population who's being discriminated against. Take care of them in ways that make sense. It's, I don't know, it's a single mother and she doesn't have enough food, but she has to try and like get through the self-checkout, and you can see she's doing something kind of dodgy with stealing, and it's not good to steal, but you're like, look at all those kids, blah, 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 secretly, right? Like, now's not the time to be like, manager, right? Like, it's not ideal, and like, have a heart. But of course, it doesn't mean you get to be dodgy with the self-checkout, right? That doesn't suddenly give you permission, right? Stealing is still a misdeed. But do you know what I mean by secretly? Like, there's a time and a place, right? There's also a time and a place to, like, what can I offer this person? What can I do to support this person? How can I protect them from others in my society who are causing them harm? In a way that is also acknowledging it's not good for the harmer to behave this way. Of course, protect the vulnerable first, but also the person who is actively harming is hurting themselves. It's not good for them. And so if your feeling is, I want to protect both of you, that's deep spiritual practice, right? So, it's a little bit like if a scary dog is running out and it's going to bite you. Yeah, you want to protect yourself, like open an umbrella, right? Block them. Who carries an umbrella? We're in Portland, but pretend you're carrying an umbrella, right? I'm thinking of the monkeys in India, right? Block them, but, block them, right? You don't want to get bit. Nobody wants rabies, right? Whatever. And also, those times when you're feeling really confident on a walk and you're sort of happy and in your body and a dog's running up to you and it could go either way. It could go like he's going to bite you or he's going to play with you, right? That one. And you go, oh, hey, aren't you beautiful? And he's like, I was going to bite you, but now I'm so happy, right? You can sort of feel it in the moment. It could have gone either way, right? But if you hadn't been grounded, it would have definitely gone violent, right? When you're grounded, there's that little window of it could go either way and you can tip it. Do you know this? So the same is true of people. Right? Where they could go into their whole aggressive, horrible thing, or they could go into their expansive, connecting thing. And you can be the condition that tips them to their better side. Sometimes there's no potential, but there are these windows in life, aren't there? Where it can go either way. So secretly is like watching for the window. Yeah. And then with Tonglen, this giving and taking practice, this giving and taking practice is to acknowledge the suffering you feel when you see suffering, acknowledge the suffering you feel when you're being oppressed. First start with you and your own pain, and then decide, this is the useful thing I need for depth. I do not want it, but I want it. So the way to make sure you do it correctly is to not skip the step of, I did not want this. If you jump over that, it won't work. Right? So say you've got, I don't know, your knee hurts, right? It's probably somebody's knee hurts right now, right? Because of sitting on the floor, or your hip, right? One side. So be like, I don't want my knee to hurt, but I want my knee to hurt. Right? You have to give it a few beats of, this is not what I wanted. And then to think, and this is the very thing that is going to open up pathways of empathy. Because without knowing a pain, I won't know the impact of pain. If I don't know the impact of pain, I'm going to be so much more judgmental to people who behave badly under the influence of pain. Thank you, knee pain. Right? And you're allowed to have the, yeah, you didn't want it. You don't want it, but it's here. Make it useful. It also doesn't mean like just sit like a rock and don't shift, because you could just, oh, there, now it's better. Okay. Don't get weird, right? Like address the suffering. But there are some sufferings that it's like it's ripened, right? The karma has ripened, and now it just has to play out. How are you going to let it play out in such a way that it's useful and you're not creating more of the same? Yeah, and so you think, how can I make this useful? Take it on the path. And then give. What do I give? Okay, what is going well in my body? Well, the whole other knee is doing fine. I don't know why you guys can't cooperate. This one's fine. All right, so I'm going to offer the comfort, flexibility, and well-being of my left knee to all sentient beings. It's silly, right? But it's not. What are you having right now that you can give and take? Yeah, and then you gradually expand. What's going on for my friends and family that they do not want? what financial crisis, what relationship breakdown, what pain, what suffering, what is going on for them that they do not want. May I take it on myself, yeah, and give it to the self-cherishing attitude at the center of my heart that says, me first, me first, me first. And so if I give it to that thought weakens and my heart is more open. And so the next time they quote whine about their difficulty that you've heard a million times, you've got another level of patience with them. Yeah, you can hold the space for them differently. And you might even be able to say, you have said that before. What can we do now? And it not have that edge, not have that little barb of enough, right? It just has we have talked about this before. It's hurting you. It's actively hurting you. Tell me what we can do for the next step of healing. How can I support your next step of healing? You know, it's a whole different vibe than someone being like, again with the thing, you know? So what you're trying to figure out is the inner positioning that brings out the best in you. And when you have that inner positioning, your well-being is increased, isn't it? And you're more effective. It's win-win. So your inner work has a direct impact in your outer work. And we can call it work, but really the work is just relationship, right? How to make relationships healthier, happier, deeper with all sentient beings. You have to start with the sentient beings in your life. And then you expand to the ones you know about, and expand to the whole world, and then expand to non-humans, and just expand, expand, expand. And this giving and taking practice can ride on the breath. Breathe in the suffering, breathe out happiness. Breathe in the suffering, breathe out happiness. And each cycle of that is opening your heart and weakening self-cherishing. That's the thought, right? So you think, I'm breathing in what I do not want. It will look toxic and disgusting even. Let's make it look like the worst pollution full of tar. It's not gonna hurt you, it's mental exercise, right? Don't worry. Breathe it in, and then you breathe out golden light, warm golden light, all your happiness, well-being, resources, good relationships, etc., out and out and out. So you can do this, standing in line at the bank. No one has to know you're doing giving and taking practice. And actually, if you do it in the bank, really interesting things happen in relationships with strangers and friends. There might be one of those spontaneous shifts of the collective vibe where suddenly strangers are talking to each other and telling silly anecdotes. You know, those beautiful magic moments that happen with strangers sometimes where you just kind of like let the facade drop and all be human for a second. If you're sort of standing still with this kind of warmth and this kind of practice, it often encourages this. Happens all the time in airports. I do this at the arrivals gate or at the departure gate, not the arrivals gate, departure gate. So I'm sitting there and everyone's on their phone and I'm like, I've checked in, I've got my boarding pass, I've done my prayers. All right, well, I could read, and then you look around and you're like, oh, look at that family. Oh God, that looks stressful. And then you're like, oh, look at that young man. He looks angsty and full of existentials. Oh, look at him. And it could be all my own projection. They could all be fine. They could all be Buddhas, right? They might all be fine. But just kind of like thinking about their suffering, breathing it in and sending them out, whatever kind of calm I have. Often spontaneously, one of them will look up and be like, hey, what's going on here with this outfit? Right? Right? But prior to that, they might not have felt the invitation, right?